Saco, and then a few that are a little further away, Cape Elizabeth, Scarborough, and Rockland. So, shaking my head, trying to remember exactly how that conversations went back then, but I think we hadn't really decided which way we should go with that, right? Because there are a lot of different ways that towns have sort of managed stormwater. Some are just squarely with the subdivision and site plans. Others get more into even residential homes that had more than 1,000 square feet of change in their area of the home. And then also, just sort of a short overview, whether or not they needed to consider a 2-year storm, a 25-year storm, and then in some cases, and specifically around, I guess, subdivisions, it'd be maybe a 50-year to 100-year storm event.
Mike, can you allow me to share my screen?
I thought I did already.
Under the share, it should say multiple. Yep, thank you. Okay, so I will put up on the screen, just for everyone's viewing, you should have, okay, so this is the, oh, let me pull it up. I might have to zoom in a little bit. So this was the, I don't know why it's not bigger on the screen.
If you close the participants, will that get larger for you?
There you go.
Okay, you can read that?
Yep.
Yep, that's
Okay.
great.
So these are the various towns. I'll just give a quick overview. This was the homework assignment for the Growth Planning Committee over this summer. They directed staff to do research on what other towns are doing for stormwater management. So we looked at the following towns. It was Kennebunkport, York, Kittery, Rockland, South Portland, Kennebunk, Biddeford, Saco, Cape Elizabeth, and Scarborough were the coastal communities that are sort of similar to or in the same region with us here in York County. And then what we did was we compiled a listing of what different criteria were in their ordinance, and we tried to summarize it the best we could to give you a full picture of what possibilities might be out there for you to consider. And so one of them was the trigger for stormwater. So what triggers the requirements that you have to have some sort of stormwater control on your property? And so again, that differs from town to town. It can be subdivision, site plan review, amount of impervious coverage, floor area. It was all over the place. You'll see, I can go down the list actually if it just helps everyone. Some had a wetland protection overlay. If there was a development taking place in that area, they would get involved. Kittery had one on 1 acre of disturbance as something that was different from site plan and subdivision, as well as mobile homes, campgrounds, and impacting wetlands. You'll see that Rockland had retaining walls, parking lots, principal accessory structures, and subdivisions. It was pretty broad for them. South Portland had 1,000 square feet of floor area within a 2-year period of construction, in addition to other types of things such as a large scale solar. And you'll see here any single family development, site plan, or subdivision is what Kennebunk looks at for stormwater. There is commercial for Biddeford. Anything that's in there discharging into their MS4, that's their municipal stormwater system. So that's different than their wastewater. It's a separate system that if you're trying to put anything into their drainage system, you would have to get reviewed by some entity in town. Saco has 1 acre or more disturbance, 10,000 square feet of new or redeveloped impervious area. And Cape Elizabeth was 1 acre or more of disturbance, and then 10,000 square feet of impervious surface. So when you see that Saco and Cape Elizabeth are pretty close, it's because they're considered MS4 communities, meaning they need to have a federal permit, and so they have to adopt these standards. They're required to. They can't. It's not voluntary, and so you'll see that a lot of their language is somewhat uniform because they are federally required. And you'll see that Scarborough has, for any kind of commercial or residential development, they have that as a trigger for stormwater.
I was gonna ask that, because I saw that they were, they had to have a stormwater management plan, and they had their permit and so forth. What triggers a town to have to get a stormwater management permit?
That's a good question. So in order to be required, you have to be an urban area. They call it in quote-unquote urban area. So there's a certain concentration of population, or you need to be within a certain metro region area that they would consider that you need a permit. So that's a great question. So
That's
right
not-
now, we're not required.
We're not
but
required.
You're right.
And not likely to have to. be
Correct.
required. Okay.
And like Cape Elizabeth would be required because it's so close to Portland, I assume, as opposed to, it's
Say it again.
Cape Elizabeth
Yep.
would probably, because it's so close to Portland.
Correct.
Yeah, because
Yep.
it's more rural than,
Yep.
well, it's as rural as
Yep.
we are.
Yep. So that's the first column. The second column was reviewing the threshold for subdivision pre versus post development. So what this is most subdivisions require some sort of stormwater management, and they need you to provide HydroCAD calculations. So this is just showing you, this is what the current runoff is on the property, and then after development, this is what the flow is on the property. And they use it based off different year storm events. So you'll see here that it varies by town to town. Currently, the town of Kennebunkport, we have a 10 to 25 year storm event. So the professional engineers have to provide us with a 10-year and a 25-year. They also have a 2-year, but I didn't put that on here because you're going to care about the bigger ones. 10 and 25-year pre versus post development to make sure those flow numbers add up. And so if we go through this list, and I will share with you that in your comprehensive plan, it does mention that the town should explore a 100-year requirement. It is a very large number to consider, but that is something to consider. York has that 100-year, 2 and 20 and 100-year, because if you're making that max best management practice for stormwater retention, if you can meet 100 years, you can meet the 2-year. So you'll see that this is 100. Kittery is at 2 to 25 year, plus a 25% for potential increases in upstream for post-construction stormwater plan.
What does that mean?
So what that requires is that they have to account, besides the 25-year, they have to do a 25% additional capacity to make sure it's sufficing past that.
Because there's going to be development upstream
Right.
and it's going to impact you,
Yep,
not just what's there today.
yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that was a different one. Again, Rockland has similar requirements to what you have currently in your ordinance. South Portland, for minor subdivisions, there's a basic stormwater management plan. Again, they are one of those MS4 communities, so they are automatically required to supply a stormwater management plan for pre and post construction. Kennebunk is 25 years, Biddeford's 25, possible 50-year storms depending on the type of development that's taking place. Again, it's kind of hard to summarize some of these, but Saco goes up to 50, and Cape Elizabeth is 2 to 25, which is similar to Kennebunkport, and then Scarborough is 25-year storm requirement, not waivable.
Where it's the higher one, would that be like in a more commercial environment that they would require the tougher standard, or?
So right now in your site plan, you do have a 50-year requirement if it's 10,000 square feet of impervious coverage for commercial. But residential, it's 2 to 25, up to that 2 to 25 right now.
Yeah, no, I meant the one that was possible. Was that Biddeford or where It wasn't,
Yeah, if possible, 50. So it depends on like how big the development was. I think
Okay.
that's, if I recall,
Yeah.
looking at the ordinance, I believe it was, larger, like so many units plus it was this. If it was under maybe 10, it was 25 year.
So when they're doing that threshold, that's looking at the water leaving that property?
Yep,
And as long as the number is relatively the same, that's okay?
yeah, as long as it was what pre-development was versus post, as long as those flow rates are equal to or less than,
Okay,
you're in,
okay.
you're in the
Can
ballpark.
that be, could I do it in such a way that I had all the stormwater coming off of one spot versus where before it was just shedding?
You have
the
to,
whole
you have to compare where it was naturally flowing
Okay,
pre-development versus post. And so usually engineers put in some sort of catch basin or something to slow the water down or retain it for a certain period to just allow it to trickle.
so you can't just inundate one neighbor and,
Correct, no,
okay, good.
no.
Good.
but under the,
All your sub-catch basements have to equal out.
Okay.
And how is that determined, the 25-year? How is that, what are the parameters
Yep.
of the 25-year storm?
So the question was, how is it determined for the 25-year storm? That is calculated as we have rain events. That real-time data, it keeps updating those various numbers. So various entities do it. I believe the University of Cornell also keeps track of that meteorological data. And so once that's updated, the developers know that this is the number that you have to now use. It's like 6 inches over, whatever storm event it is, and they plug that number in there.
So that the property has to be able to handle 6 inches of water
That's just a example, yeah,
over
Yeah.
a certain period.
right.
yeah,
Jane, you need to be close to the microphone.
yeah.
Yeah.
So to Dan's question, under our current ordinances, where you have a non-subdivision, single-family house, and you have, 150, say it's a builder's acre, and you have all of that water that came onto it, and then all of the water that flowed onto it.
Mhm.
Can you currently, or under, if you had, a standard like one of these, can you direct it just in one spot off the property? So what is being done in 2 houses in our neighborhood, what has been done recently, not part of a subdivision, they have a beautiful drainage system, wonderful French drains. They take everything that entered the property, they funneled it into a tube, they rushed it to the next door neighbor's property, and then tied everything from the lot to the escape hatch downhill.
Yep.
So what used to flow over, say, 150 feet is now flowing in 2 feet or 3 feet without any, buffers,
Right,
et cetera.
we don't require that of single-family dwellings, so right now they can do that.
Just
If they were part of a subdivision, yes, we
Yes,
do require
right.
them to calculate their outlets to other properties, and that's what's called a sub-catch basement. Where do those outlets, pre versus post-development, are they making the same flow numbers?
Got it.
And so we tell people, and that's the problem with this is not a clear science. So as I just mentioned earlier, that figure that Jane mentioned about, where do these numbers come from? They're real-life data. So all we can do is we're planning for what was currently existing now as the 25-year storm.
Sure.
If things start getting, a lot more heavier rain events, that number's gonna increase, but that system that was what was built back then.
Sure.
Right.
And so it might not, people might have runoff, but we're trying to plan for the future the best we can.
But a single-family home.
Right.
in our
They can
town
do
right
it
now,
anything
They
right
can do
now.
whatever they
Yep.
want, right? So, which is somewhat the crux of the discussion, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
how
We
this
wanna
came
have-
out.
We want to be good neighbors, and
Right.
if we're doing modifications to our land, we want to have common sense solutions to not inundate your neighbor or be inundated by your neighbor
Yep.
with water that you had that starts running into your garage or flooding your basement because there's no place for it to go,
Right.
right?
Yep. So that's that section. We'll move to the next section, which is reviewing the threshold site plan. So this was again, it's sort of like a trigger for site plan review process. And so what does that look like for reviewing for 25-year storms? And I mentioned that for the site plan, it's 10, 25-year storm events, and it's 10,000 square feet for 50-year storm events. So if you have a commercial building in Kennebunkport, if they wanted to build something that was 10,000 square feet, they had to design their stormwater system to mitigate 50-year rain event, not a 25. Outside of that, though, if it's, any kind of other development, it would be a 10 to 25-year event. So you'll see here that this was Kittery, if I remember correctly, is a 100-year storm event is what they require for all their developments that undergo site plan review process. I wish I could freeze the panel here. Hold on, let me hide these so I don't lose them. So we were at Kittery is at 2 to 25 years, and they do the plus 25% for potential increases in upstream runoff requires for post-construction stormwater plan. So again, they're just planning for capacity in the future. Rockland, 2 to 25 years. South Portland's 15,000 square feet of disturbed area, must include a stormwater plan, post-construction, and all other include a basic stormwater plan at a 1/2 inch rainfall for 90% of the impervious surface. So they've really gone into the weeds with this. I don't know if that makes sense for us at all. They don't require us to look at that figure on the rain years. Kennebunk is again standard with you is 25 years. Biddeford 25 and possible 50-year again. Saco's 50. And Cape Elizabeth is 25 and 100-year within the Resource Protection District, which requires an additional permit from the planning board. But other than that, it would be usually 2 to 25. And Scarborough has 25-year, and lid if not meeting the requirements of the state stormwater permit. So we talked about low impact design. We had a main DEP here to explain how that all works, and we're going to look at those standards too moving forward. But that just gives you a sense of, they have like some alternative idea if you can't meet those requirements, what you could use. Scarborough also had a very nice handout for low impact development, which I think I shared with you earlier this year. So that's that section. Is there any questions?
No.
Okay.
No questions.
Okay. So reviewing for the threshold for single-family developments. So this is what we sort of alluded to. We really don't have standards right now in our ordinance. York has 2 to 50-year storm events. They have to, again, measure that, especially when filling in a wetland in the Wetland Protection Overlay District. York had a very protective wetland protection in their ordinances. They really value them, so they had a lot of protections. Kittery has 22 to 25-year events when an acre of disturbance occurs for single-family development. 2 to 25-year for Rockland. And so just to let you know, with Kittery, if they don't have an acre of disturbance, then they're not going to have stormwater standards. That's just how that one plays out.
Can I ask you a question about the acre threshold? Like, most houses are not an acre of disturbance for the house and the driveway and the patio and the whatever.
Some are, some with the roads, some,
With the road.
yeah. It all depends. And then if you do any site work, if you're doing any grading, like you want, really flat lawn, that would be disturbing the soil. So there are times where that does happen.
But would you know about that in a typical single-family development? I mean, I'm watching what's happening on one right now that I'm sure was not in the application for a building permit, and it's like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, they're supposed to let us know if they're intending to do any kind of excavation on the site, what they're intending to do. They're supposed to be providing a site plan layout of, what they want to do for grading and all that on the property. So,
So
I
if
don't know
someone,
what that specific example, maybe we can talk afterwards and.
yeah,
we can-
I mean, like if someone's
Yeah.
bringing in a lot of fill, that should be,
Yeah, that should be something that is covered.
And that's required for if you're building a new home.
Yeah.
If you're renovating a home or you're doing any type of that work, does that also get triggered?
Only in shoreland zoning would we get involved with that. With any kind of excavation that's in the shoreland zone, we would require a land use permit. But I want to put a flower bed in, like, we don't
Yeah,
We
right.
don't get involved with that.
Right, but if you're not in the shoreline zone and you're putting
Right.
on an
Yeah, we
addition
wouldn't get
that's,
involved with
whatever it might be, that you're still within your lot coverage areas and all the rest, you can do whatever, right now, of course, you can do anything with
Right.
your property, right, and grade it, so.
Yeah, we do have standards for erosion sediment control, so even if they do that, they have to make sure they provide, okay, you're doing a silt fence barrier or something to keep any exposed soil, and when are you going to reseed it, all that stuff.
that's during construction,
Right, during
That's-
construction. Yep,
but not afterwards.
correct.
You could have a Brown River running down onto your neighbor's property, and, it is what it is.
For a single
Currently.
family.
Yeah,
No, we'd still have we have erosion and sediment control standards in our townwide ordinances, they still have to follow that. So they would have to do something
Yeah.
to stabilize the soil.
The soil,
Okay.
till the grass and everything grew
Yeah.
in, then you can get rid of the fence, right?
Rockland was 2 to 25 years. South Portland did not have a threshold for single-family development. I thought that was interesting. Kennebunk does not have any standards for single-family development. Biddeford has 25-year and possible 50-year storms if not part of an approved subdivision. So it all depends on how they were approved for the town, for that city. Saco, it's been a while since I looked at that section. I'd have to look up that section. I'm surprised there's no link there. And if over an acre of disturbance, it's 2 to 25 years in Cape Elizabeth. And then Scarborough practices lid standards for new development. That's what they have and they give that handout guidance to people. Any questions on single-family development standards?
nope, thanks.
Okay. Next, we have lid standards. This is, again, low-impact development standards. The town doesn't currently have any. York does have, if the property runs up to 100% lot coverage in subdivisions, they require low-impact design standards. This row, by the way, is a little bit clunky because, again, you have to go through searching multiple parts of their ordinances, and it's not all laid out nice and neat. So in Kittery, it's in conservation subdivisions, they require low-impact design standards, and some of that, I think, was how much tree removal you were having in that area. Rockland, I couldn't find any in Rockland. South Portland did have, and they had a definition that included low-impact design standards that met DEP's stormwater manual. And they had a schedule activities and prohibitions of practices. And that was referring back to Maine DEP's 2006 publication on stormwater management. So this was dealing with stormwater BMPs, also include any kind of treatment requirements, operating procedures, and practices to control plant site runoff, spillage or leak, sludge, and waste disposal or drainage from raw material storage. So that was what they had in their ordinance. Kennebunk did not. The town did post educational material on low-impact development in March of 2024. And in their comp plan on page 262 and 270, they also mentioned the desire to look at low-impact design standards for their community. So I left hyperlinks in there for you as well, if you wanted to check those out. So they're doing more of an education outreach right now for their community. Biddeford, I couldn't find any. Saco did have a section on rain gardens that they encouraged them as part of their development for low-impact design. Cape Elizabeth did. They had a broad approach to it that allowed for low-impact design for stormwater treatment measures, including natural process such as vegetative buffers, are given preference over constructed treatment, stormwater treatment measures. So like more of a man-made, they'd rather have more of a low-impact design standard for any kind of stormwater. And then Scarborough did have low-impact design because we saw their handout.
Mhm.
So any questions on that?
So it looks like of all these, it was just York that sort of had a carrot there, right? That if you did low-impact design, you could have up to 100% coverage,
Right.
right? The other ones were more, they required either some type or
Mm-hmm.
it was just not applicable or,
So what does 100% lot coverage look like?
I think Dock Square. I think that's a good example for us to think about. Like, those parcels are pretty much at 100%.
Right. So, yeah, I'm just thinking on new development, are there areas of town, I mean, if you know, that would lend themselves to a Dock Square look and feel? Or a village, a small village where, essentially the whole lot is the house and the driveway and little picket fence up front,
I think Cape Porpoise Center is sort of like that too.
Uh-huh.
They're pretty built up, and that was way before land use standards were in effect.
Right, of course.
So a lot of it was paved over, and especially in that where the old post office was and stuff like that. Those lots are pretty developed. They were well before your 20% lot coverage requirements.
So it would be theoretically possible to do low impact with 100% lot coverage, according to,
Possibly. What I will also mention is, so in our ordinance, outside of shoreline zoning, you require 20% lot coverage as meaning the coverage of structures.
right,
Doesn't mean impervious surface, so in theory, people could just pave over
they're old.
their whole property if they wanted to, if they didn't want to, I don't want to manage grass. We only require it's 20% lot coverage of structures. And so that's something that we might want to explore changing and making it uniform with in shoreline zoning, you can only have 20% of all impervious, non-vegetative surfaces.
right.
And that's anything. That's a parking lot, that's a gravel pathway,
Right.
any of that is included. And so that might be an easy change that we can make. And then, if you want to allow them to increase their lot coverage, we can look at, certainly, I know we talked about the pervious paver options outside of shoreline zoning.
Right.
We can't do anything in shoreline zoning currently because that's state mandated. But we could give an allowance that if you use this technology to retain your stormwater, we won't count that as part of your lot coverage as a
Sure.
carrot. So that's just some things to think about for that section.
Galen, may I ask?
Yeah, could you
Sure,
just
can you go to the mic?
Use the mic, please?
Mike?
Thank you. And then just reintroduce yourself to the.
I'm
the member.
Beverly Soul. I live at 16 Spring Street, right off Dock Square, and I own a multi-unit. And this is very interesting to me because every time there's a storm, 3 of my neighbors dump water on my property. And you're talking about pretty much new development. But when you just mentioned Dock Square, houses are close together, and I personally experience, because of the slope of the land, land from other properties come to my property before it gets to a storm drain. Also, every time the town resurfaces the road, Route 9 through town, I shudder because it makes my house a little lower. They keep raising the road every time they tar it, and I can't raise my house. I did resurface my driveway 5, 6 years ago, and I had to raise the driveway so that the water would run off my property to get to the town storm drain. So older houses, existing houses, we're not moving. We don't meet all those regulations you're talking about. They're all put there long before we had regulations, and I've wondered what to do. If you have an answer, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, especially when property is already developed, what a lot of towns have to do in the future is they do have to discuss, okay, what type of infrastructure can we put in to direct this stormwater where it needs to go and have an outlet. And so, water's going to take the least path of resistance. So certainly communities have looked at investing in MS4 systems, so they will put a stormwater system in, especially in urban areas, to direct the flow into storm drains, which that's what's happening right now, correct?
It goes where it wants to go.
Yeah.
Which is to the back of my barn building, and there's a humidity issue in the building all the time because it gets so much water. There's no real answer.
Yeah.
Other than excavating somewhere, and I happen to have beautiful 200-year-old elm trees in my
Sure.
backyard,
Yep.
so we're not going to kill those to take care of the water.
Yep.
Because that's their role in the first place, to take care of the water.
And they do, and they love it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they do.
But that's part of what we hope to do, is if somebody's building next door to you an accessory dwelling unit, we change the code so that if they did that, they would have to manage that drainage on site, and so it didn't go off of
Yeah.
your property. So we made that one change when we made the change for accessory dwelling unit, and part of our goal here was to make that uniform. So if somebody added a garage where there wasn't a garage, or put in a 2-bay garage,
That's not going to happen. And my property is a little over 1/4 of an acre,
right,
and all my other neighbors too are on
tiny,
even
yeah,
less than that.
sure.
So,
So folks also, they also use rain barrels as well to capture the water on their own property through their rain spouts. And that's a way that they can reuse that water in their gardens and little flower beds that they might have. I've seen that in urban planning areas, but you're right. What people do is they develop and then they just say, well, the stormwater is someone else's problem. And we're trying to change that conversation now that it's our personal responsibility,
Yeah.
each one of us, to
well,
make.
these were all built,
Yep,
the least
Sure.
is probably 75 years old, and mine is like 200, so
Yep.
they've been there long before any of us here.
yep.
And,
Yeah, there-
but it's interesting. I'm not looking for an answer.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just an issue in living in town.
It is.
Thank you, thank you.
We discussed, the next column we discussed was fingerprint design, and so if you remember, the fingerprint design is basically when you have a vacant piece of property that's completely wooded. The concept here is to cut only a number of trees necessary for the building envelope, necessary to build the structure, and maybe a little bit of extra on the sides, but really keeping the natural vegetation that's already on the property, not clear cutting everything just to make it lawn. And again, trees play an important part in, as canopy, as a vegetative canopy, they naturally slow down water as it goes to the ground, and it helps with also retaining stormwater on the site. And so this was a concept that was discussed. I did do research on this. I will say most of the towns, from my recollection, they do not really have standards, that term fingerprint design. Instead, I had to look at what their ordinance says. And so Kittery had one that's a 40-foot buffer surrounding lots for subdivisions. That's what they required, which sort of gets to our point. But, I mean, if you have a large parcel, that 40 feet's not really much when you consider how large the parcel is. Rockland did have some buffering for when in commercial zones, that buffering for residents. So that was, I guess it was more of a cohabitating with planning efforts to make sure that you're shielding more on the side of light and sound, I would think, and dust than it was for stormwater purposes. I didn't see anything in South Portland. Kennebunk did have for site design layout. This was under Article 10, Section 23, their design review standards. And they basically just said existing trees and natural vegetation along the street frontage and edges of the site shall be evaluated and hopefully retained. We do normally require, for subdivisions, there is that requirement if it's a new development that if it enters onto a public street, we do require a vegetative buffer, but not on the sides or in the rear. Biddeford did require it for, yes, the existing trees to remain on the parcel. Saco did as well. And clearing of 2 or more acres of trees, there were regulations on that you can't just do that. Cape Elizabeth, there was, again, subdivisions where practical shall be required to preserve the natural features. That's the best I could come up with. It's not really low-impact design, but that's the closest I could find. And Scarborough, again, the board may require that a proposed subdivision design to conserve the trees, streams, topography, and natural assets on the site. But that's only for subdivision. It's not for just single-family lots. So any thoughts on fingerprint design? I wish I could find you something that a coastal community has right now, but I'm not seeing anything that's really strong that's,
Yeah.
besides the 40-foot on all sides, but that's,
What was the thing about solar design in the last town?
for solar energy systems, they limit tree cuttings. And then they require a minimum 30-foot width of the tree buffer to connected corridors. So if it's a vegetated area and it's going on multiple parcels, you can't just cut that and disconnect that natural vegetative buffer in the community. You have to keep it connected by at least a 30-foot width. Thoughts on fingerprint design?
Well, kind of all these, I mean, it's just a bit of how do you capture all, like, here they had to specifically put in something for solar, right, because it wasn't captured under
Yeah.
something else. So you start, okay, do you have to do that for a cell tower? Do you have to do that? I mean, how many different types of structures can we build as man that we have to take into consideration, where if they build, they could have an impact on stormwater, amongst other things, of course, but
Mm-hmm.
versus having something that would just be consistent across, no matter what you do and what you're building, this is what the piece you have to take into place. That's new, and then you have to figure out something for existing.
Yeah, right now, the only thing that you have in your ordinance is just about open space and maximum lot coverage, the 20% rule. So that's really the only provision that you have is 20% of the lot has to be, not developed. And that's not really strong.
I wonder how the towns make the decisions on all this, like what causes one town to do one thing and another to do another thing.
The mistakes you learn from, I guess, or if you're, right?
Well, it's what they value
Yeah,
too
what
as a
they-
community.
yeah. Could be what you
We,
value, but
know,
what you've seen other, maybe
Yeah.
cities or towns
Yeah.
struggled with. Oh, good, look what happened over there.
Doing exactly what we're doing right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And coming to what they think are reasonable solutions for the issues they see
In their particular
facing them.
town.
And-
It's more of an art than a science, I would say.
It is, and one thing I do really enjoy about local governments is we are the laboratories really of innovation and what happens. And, a lot of towns, they do this type of research. They look at what other towns have done, but where did those towns get that?
Yeah.
There had to be at least one guinea pig to try something out to make it
Sure.
work. And so, similarly here, like, we are looking at what other towns are doing, but what fits Kennebunkport? What do we want to see to protect our natural resources? I think that's something that's very important to the residents here in town, especially when we're seeing, if you look at the data for your growth permits, The areas that get maxed out is actually in our rural forest and farming area, and that's sort of an area where there's a lot of trees, and so what do we want to do to preserve? And it's also a little bit more uphill, a lot more steeper slopes, and so where those developments are going, where they're going to eventually go to. It's going to go eventually to the coast, and it's going to impact the stormwater all the way down. So just think about that, what you
Yeah.
want to do for,
Well, I think we should take it column by column.
Yep.
Is that is that the end? No, we've
no,
still got,
we still got some more. Next one is impervious surface definition. So I looked at all the definitions for what we currently had. I discussed a little bit about how certain things are excluded for our lot coverage. So you'll see here the percentage of the lot covered by structures is what our definition says. And within shoreline zoning, the lot coverage shall include driveways, parking lots, and other non-vegetative surfaces. So you'll see there is quite a difference between the various towns. They have it for all, in York, they have it for all covered surfaces, all building structures, any areas that are concrete, sidewalks, so they basically have any unvegetative structures. They have something for gravel driveways where they do a ratio of a certain percentage. But by and large, they count everything as a vegetative, non-vegetative surface or impervious surface. You'll see Kittery, they, again, paved and unpaved. They have all of it, asphalt, stone, concrete, anything that reduces permeability in Kittery. Portions of the lot area include structures, impervious built improvements. Same for South Portland, anything that is impervious. Lot coverage in Kennebunk is a percentage of the gross lot covered and occupied by principal and accessory buildings. So we sort of mirror right now what Kennebunk is doing for calculating lot coverage. No definition for impervious in the ordinances. They do have a lot coverage definition, which is the percentage of the lot covered by all buildings and impervious surfaces. I thought that was interesting that they mention impervious surfaces, but they don't define it in their ordinance. Saco, again, anything that's impervious. Cape Elizabeth, anything that's impervious. Scarborough, anything that's impervious. So really, Kennebunk and Kennebunkport are the two outliers that don't include all impervious surfaces.
Do we have the percentages that each of those use?
I don't know if I did that research.
Just wondering, like, if we use 20%, right now we're using that for structures.
No, I don't have that listed.
If we did that for everything, that would mean the structures would have to be smaller, right?
Correct.
So that may be not what we want to push. Then we have a lot more non-conforming properties.
So, I mean, just to use their example, so most lot areas in town, especially in the rural parts, is 40,000 square feet. So you're looking at 8,000 square feet for a building envelope.
Yeah, which is a good-sized home.
Yeah,
it's a huge home.
and driveway and
Right.
but that's a lot of impervious area for people to consider. Exempt stormwater management facilities from the setbacks. This was a unique provision that I saw in various communities. We sort of have that. We don't really count them as a structure for setback purposes. So what I mean by this is, so if someone wants to put in a swale system or a retention of any sort, some communities have a setback requirement, some don't. And so I looked for exemptions, just to give you an idea. And so the only one, let me hide this. So this was Kittery had a 30-foot from the property line. Rockland didn't really have anything listed as an exemption, so they had to meet the setback requirements. South Portland, they allowed it in the street right-of-way. If the planning board determines there was no other alternatives exist, I thought that was interesting. Kennebunk doesn't sound like they have any setback exemption requirements that I could tell from their ordinances. Biddeford did exempt stormwater management facilities.
Okay.
Saco did not. They said that there was no clear definition for what structures require setbacks, so it was kind of unsure with that one. Cape Elizabeth did, and Scarborough does not exempt. Right now, we currently exempt, so I don't know if you want to change that or not, but that's,
I'm sure somebody would come up with a great idea of having it's something they're putting in for stormwater that also doubles as a deck, or,
Swimming pool.
yeah,
a rain garden.
you put it right up on the property line. Yeah. You have a lot of developers in our town that are very,
Yep,
think outside the box.
they do.
That's their job.
We have others that understand the spirit of the rule, stick
Yes.
to it, for sure. Okay.
Fill in wetlands. So we do allow for filling in wetlands. I just wanted to show analysis of what other towns have done. Wetlands do serve as a natural filtration system. They're almost like a rain garden in essence that are naturally forming. And so, some communities really were trying to discourage filling in those wetlands because when you fill in those wetlands, where's that water going to go now? And that can contribute to more stormwater in the communities, so.
Yeah, can I ask a question there on that?
Yep.
Because I thought the state and others had to get involved when you were gonna fill in a wetland. Are we talking about wetlands that kind of fall out of their purview?
Minimus, smaller.
Real small, so not
Yes.
vernal pools, not wetlands that are,
And you can get a permit from both DEP and the
Sure.
Army Corps to fill them in.
sure,
This local government can be more restrictive, and we can say no, even though you have federal and state approval, we can say, we're a home rule state, home rule town, we want to protect, these critical resources. So that's a policy decision to consider if that's the direction you want to go. But yes, you can fill wetlands in town. That's,
And
Yep.
where they do have controls over the wetlands, do those controls take effect in areas where you have like a private road or, so if somebody were to have a wetland on their property on one of the private roads here in town, we don't have we don't care if somebody fills in a wetland now.
we do,
We do care.
Yep.
Okay.
So that even though that maybe the size of the wetland is below the thresholds from being considered part of the shoreline zoning, because we do have certain freshwater wetlands that are less than 2 acres that you can fill in our current shoreline zoning ordinance. So as long as they have the permits and approval from the state and they get their land use permit to build the road, we would allow them to, but they couldn't build the road until they get their permits from the
But
state.
if you have existing road, private road.
Yep.
You can do whatever you want to with wetlands. Is that right? No.
They would still have to get a permit and review by town internally. They wouldn't go in front of the planning board or anything like that. And I know that was something that did come up before. We did have a person who did fill in a property in town. They filled in a wetland, and the abutters thought that they should have been notified. That seemed like a very strenuous requirement, a big ask of the administration to try to do all that. But the state does have an appeal process, which that does amaze me, that DEP and Army Corps, depending on the size of the wetland, they do have an appeal process once it's approved, but who knows about the approval? Like that's the disconnect. So I'll go through the towns, what they currently have for filling in wetlands. York doesn't allow filling in a wetland without a permit for roads, access to adjacent subsurface waters, and existing structures and other uses. So they were pretty restrictive on filling in wetlands. And you can see there's a little excerpt here that we can consider. And they have something called a wetland permit. So in addition to the state requirements, there's even a local permit option in York to fill in a wetland in their town. Kittery allows for filling a wetland, but they have to get planning board approval if they're altering a wetland of an acre or larger in size. So that's a unique thing that that town has decided to do. Same thing with Rockland. They require a planning board to permit such activity from taking place and filling in any freshwater wetland. This, again, would not be a problem for things that already trigger site plan review and subdivision review, because that's normally being reviewed anyway by the planning board. But there might be projects that are just single family or, you know, they want to build a driveway, and right now that doesn't require any review by the planning board. South Portland requires planning board to determine the minimal impact as possible. So that was the other reason why they did this is, okay, can you reconfigure your development to not impact that wetland in some way? Kennebunk does allow with planning board approval, or site plan review board has a separate wetlands mitigation ordinance. So I cited those available to you as well, the language for that. Biddeford, yes, with a NERPA permit, they allow you to fill in wetlands, but you still need a National Resource Protection Act permit, which is similar to Kennebunkport. We require NERPA review by the state. Saco does require a planning board approval for filling in wetland in addition to state approvals. Cape Elizabeth is yes, and they refer to their sections about resource protection districts and filling in of wetlands. And then wetlands in a subdivision, they have design standards in place and planning board review for proposed conservation subdivisions to fill more than 4,300 square feet of wetland. I'm guessing in a conservation subdivision, that's more for a park or some sort where they're proposing maybe pathways and things for wetlands. Any questions on the wetland?
What's happened with wetlands after the Supreme Court overturned, you know, what was a navigable stream and wetlands and what wasn't? And I never really understood how that, you know, it was the farmer who wanted to fill in his.
Oh, it was the Waters of the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah, that was dealing, if I remember correctly, it's been a while, but farmers like had puddles and stuff to
Right.
count as
Right.
waters of the United States, and the Supreme Court ruled that out.
Right.
I don't believe that changes jurisdiction of filling in wetlands. This was more like other surface areas, like maybe some vernal pools that weren't significant and
Okay.
those types of activities. That was where I think the Supreme Court struck that down.
Right.
But navigable waters, that's always been under the purview of.
Right. But
Yeah.
you know, the EPA
Yeah.
or whomever had taken the position, well, if it leads into
Right.
navigable water, then it's, you know, the drainage goes there, then and they cut it way back.
Yeah, I don't think, nothing
So-
has changed with filling in wetlands. That's
Okay.
always been under their purview for that. Yeah. Good question. Next one is performance standards for stormwater best management practices. And so what this is dealing with is, you know, do we have performance standards in place that allow for best management practices on site? We currently do. It's back in 1995 for the best management practices that we cite in our comprehensive plan. So we wanted to see what other folks had for their communities. And so there's the following completion of construction. They did have some sort of standards in place to make sure it was pre versus post construction. I think most of these had yeses. Rockland had a maintenance agreement required, which I sort of like that because we currently don't have a maintenance agreement for any kind of stormwater best management practices that are put in. And so how does this work? If a person puts in a catch basin system, you know, leaves fall, debris fall, and sometimes that clogs the grates. And so if you don't have an agreement that's codified, how is that going to be maintained by? And usually in subdivisions, especially in these towns, they require the HOA or some other entity that they need to clean out on a once a year or twice a year basis, just inspect to make sure that the grates are cleaned as part of their property maintenance. So that's what the maintenance agreements mean when I
Sure.
search through. So you'll see Rockland, South Portland all had that. I did not find any kind of performance standards for Kennebunk. And then Biddeford, yes, did have for maintenance agreement, and then they also had standards for annual inspection for any kind of MS4 tie-ins. And so that means anywhere that you have a catch basin that ties into the municipal system, you would have to inspect it on an annual basis to make sure it's not clogged or any issues are on the property. Saco, I'm gonna have to pull that one up because I don't remember that section. So they have a whole list of sections, don't know if I can, they have a whole list of sections about general stormwater runoff provisions, runoff management, stormwater quality and quality control, post-construction stormwater management plan, and drainage plan, and standards for drainage easements and rights of way, in addition to just general erosion and sediment control provisions. So they have an extensive list to choose from. Cape Elizabeth has, again, a maintenance agreement, and again, if any tie-ins to their MS4 system, it's on an annual inspection. And I couldn't find anything for Scarborough on their performance standards, specifically for stormwater best management practices. Any questions on that one?
Not I.
Okay. Shoreland zoning, stormwater performance standards. So this is dealing with just shoreland zoning, and I think in summary, what I'll say is because most towns, especially coastal towns, have to adopt stormwater performance standards. They all have yeses.
Right.
So that was just something to look at. I think York, did York have something that was interesting? They had where possible existing natural runoff control features such as berms, swales, terraces, and wooded areas shall be retained in order to reduce runoff and encourage infiltration of stormwaters. So that was a unique provision that we didn't have in our section, so I added that there just for consideration. And they have parking areas shall be designed to prevent stormwater runoff from flowing directly into the water body or wetland, and where feasible to retain it on all runoff on site. So that was they had some more restrictive requirements than what shoreland zoning required, so I added that there as a note if you guys wanted to beef up your section on shoreland zoning. Next section we have is Chapter 500. That's the stormwater management rules. Do they currently have anything in place? We do. I could not find it in Kittery, Rockland, South Portland, Kennebunk, Biddeford, Saco, Cape Elizabeth. We all have some section of Chapter 500, the stormwater management rules, in our ordinances at some point. Stormwater discharge to public systems. So what we were looking here is what mechanisms were in place. Was there any approvals that were required if you wanted to connect or discharge to a public system? And again, it's looking out for the taxpayers in improving any type of system. Who would bear the cost of that? And so currently Kennebunkport does allow for connection to our public system if the Public Works Director approves it. South Portland, again, if I didn't find anything, I just left it blank. South Portland does require approval. They have to use best management practices to make sure it's treated before it goes into their system.
Mm-hmm.
So that was what their section had. Kennebunk does not have any requirements to connect to their stormwater discharge. And it just says no stormwater shall be permitted to drain across the surface of a street or at an intersection. So that made it clear that they don't want you tying into their systems currently. Biddeford does allow with planning board approval. Saco, yes, only when site retention or not possible is when discharge is not possible on site to a best management practice on site. Cape Elizabeth does require municipal approval prior to connecting, and I couldn't find anything for Scarborough. So right now, our practice is Public Works Director has to approve it. Do we want to change that approval? Something to
And that could be from a single-family home or a subdivision, right?
Yep. If you're trying to tie in,
To pub-
yep. And again, that's what historically has happened. We've had recent subdivisions where they talk to the Public Works Director, but there's no
standards.
there's no like,
I mean,
the
even
planning
if,
board has to approve it, or, it's just, if the director feels it's not going to increase, if the system can handle it, it's fine, so.
so would that be different in different parts of town? My impression was when we had these horrible storms, we're discharging sewage into the river because we don't have capacity currently.
Yeah, so that's, we're talking about two systems, so there's probably some confusion. There's a stormwater system,
Yeah.
and
in
there's
some
the
places.
wastewater system. And so stormwater system is not connected to the sewer, it's culverts, and they're connected together, or they're swales, and they eventually go to some body
The
of
closest
water.
water, yeah.
Yep. The wastewater, if people connect their gray water to, if they have a sub pump and they connect it to their gray water, that's how the infiltration can go into the said system. It also can be infiltrated because of the soil conditions of whatever area, that there might be some leakage in that area that allows for infiltration to occur. So those are two different systems. This is just for stormwater, not wastewater.
Yeah.
Stormwater that they need the approval. So I think your concern was, when we have these events, that there was an
Water-
increased issue of capacity of the wastewater system. That's my understanding.
Well, of both systems. I mean, when the water is not leaving neighborhoods because it can't go anywhere because the level of the adjoining marsh
Right.
is high, or there's just, the whole neighborhood's inundated,
Or it's in a very low spot.
or it's in a low spot.
Yeah, and that's the struggle, is like, I think of Goose Rock's Beach as a prime example. Down along Kings Highway, there were sections of the road where it was inundated with water.
Right.
And if you look at it, it was sort of in a bowl, and there was nowhere for it to go. There was a coastal wetland, and then there was the ocean, and it just sat there. And unfortunately, even when you put in a stormwater system like that, it is difficult for that area because it's how low-lying that area is. When you put in a culvert system, you're always trying to do the grade.
Sure.
It's already low-lying, so how are you getting it
Yeah, let's
out there? Yeah,
do a New Orleans pump out.
right. And I believe that our fire department does have, they are looking at investing in, it's a short-term Band-Aid solution, but to deal with pumping of water in the future. But when it's that saturated, especially in a coastal wetland, you're not gonna just be able to get rid of that water
Right.
in the time being, so.
So if someone were building a new house, doing a tear down at Goose Rocks, and they wanted to tie in with the Public Works, say,
Yeah, I don't think we have any, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we have any stormwater infrastructure there at present. There is no catch basins and culverts, from my
oh,
understanding.
yeah, here and there.
There is?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm thinking of that area that was low.
Yeah, no, the Conservation Commission just did a 2-year study on pesticides, and they actually went to the storm drains and tested on particular times when there was water flow. That's where the ideal place to test, to see what pesticides were present.
Okay,
So-
I thought that was in the streams. Maybe I was mistaken.
No, I think it was right in, like along Wildwood, and they're here and there, I
Okay,
think.
okay,
I could be wrong, but that was my understanding
yeah,
of what the guidance was, I think, from Friends of Casco Bay, from all of their experience on finding and testing for pesticides.
Okay.
There's one thing we ought to check, I don't recall listing stormwater, like a stormwater system on any of our maps. Did we?
I thought there was one.
Did we?
I
No,
could
we
be
had
wrong.
the sewer and we had the water. I don't remember discussing stormwater.
I know, all I know is
Stormwater
it's specifically where there was the ponding issue.
Yeah,
We were having that discussion with the city and the town engineer and the public works director about doing that, and I know that
I don't
section
think in
doesn't-
that area
it
there's
doesn't have-
any.
It
Yeah,
doesn't
it's-
have any.
Right,
Um,
it's more toward the middle of the beach and.
And it's kind of hard in that area. So what we would encourage is like people, especially in Goose Rocks Beach, where they are, there are a lot of small non-conforming lots. It's kind of hard for development. How can you retain some of that water on your property and collectively, make a little bit of a dent in these events? But again, it is tough when you have a 500-year storm that comes in. It makes it difficult to do the planning necessary to mitigate the effects.
Or two in 1 week.
Yeah, that was quick, yeah. Okay, no other questions with that one. I also just, again, this was a random one. There were some towns that had aquifer protection. Kennebunk had one. So I thought that was interesting to put that in there for you. And then Biddeford had an overlay district because they do care about their drinking water. That was just a random thing to consider.
What was our recommendation on that in the comp plan? Because there were two areas that were highlighted, one off
right.
Guinea
Close to
Road,
Biddeford.
and, no, one was right in,
I think it crossed over, right?
yeah, one was in Biddeford,
Right.
and mostly Biddeford, but I didn't remember what the recommendation or the
don't-
strategy was.
There was a strategy, and I can pull that up for you. There was a strategy that dealt with exploring the creation of an aquifer overlay and protection district.
Oh, okay, so exactly that.
Let me see if I can pull it up.
Yeah, there were two areas.
Let's see.
Going to excuse myself?
Yep.
Sure.
Very, very interesting.
Thanks for coming.
Arlene may help me get in touch with you somehow. I tried to do it through the website and it just went back to Arlene, so.
Okay.
you know,
That-
so-
Yep, I sent
Thank
you the
you.
link, so you should have it. Yep.
Thanks for coming.
So the water resources section of your strategies has to protect the quality and quantity of water resources. The policy is to protect drinking water resources, and the specific the specific strategy is collaborate with the city of Biddeford to ensure cross-boundary protection of groundwater resources, create an aquifer protection overlay district. And that was a medium-term goal for the planning board and Planning and Development Department.
Okay.
So that was your strategy. So you can see Biddeford currently has that, we don't currently have it, so.
Right.
We can explore doing that. I just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Yeah.
That was something. So Cape Elizabeth and Scarborough both have aquifer protection overlay districts as well for their water. And last but not least, we had miscellaneous provisions, and Saco had a provision that allowed for fish passage of special road culverts. So that was something a little bit interesting that dealt with their environment. And then Cape Elizabeth had a very easy to read on page 260 of their zoning ordinance, just a very easy to read section on stormwater that we thought was worth looking into. And then Scarborough had stormwater facilities deducted from open space calculations. And they also had user agreements to protect trees in connected corridors. So that was their miscellaneous things that we saw that were like, okay, maybe this is something to consider. But that was the research, the findings of the research, I should say. And at this point, staff would like some, I guess, direction from you all, what you
which way we
think.
go.
And, yeah.
So I like your suggestion.
Yeah, I think we need to
All-
start at the first column
Yeah,
and
or second column.
second column.
No, we are.
Yeah, in terms of the triggers.
Okay.
And start there and, what the requirement is a separate issue. Obviously, you can have a trigger and then how meaningful, how, strenuous the requirement is a separate issue. So I'm certainly in favor of single-family development. We should be a trigger. And I'm also in favor of, some square footage, disturbance. We had talked about trying to, I think it was the planning board representative recommendation that if we were doing it for accessory dwelling units, we should match that for other structures. If I build a barn, if I build a similarly sized structure, which would obviously be far less than an acre,
So accessory apartments can be 800 square feet of livable area.
livable.
Yeah.
That's on multiple floors.
Yeah, just 800 square feet total.
Right, but that's not, the footprint can be, what's the minimum footprint?
That's.
Or maximum
There is no footprint, it's just the living area, so it's cumulative, so if you have, I guess, a 400 by 400, it's a
So
two-story.
you could have expanded a house by 1 foot out and 10 feet down, and you somehow made
Yeah.
that into not that you would do that.
No,
Right.
Well, you might need a stairway.
But yeah, you might need a
You might
stairway or
just
something,
put a
so it's
stairway
only
in.
30 square
Yeah.
feet, and you would, according to our ordinance, we would have to change that. You'd have to, you'd have to do a stormwater management.
Right, because you're adding to an existing structure.
So that, I don't know if that makes sense to go that low. 1,000 square feet seems to be a number that like Portland, 1,000 square feet of floor area within a 2-year period.
But that's a big, 100 by 100 in
Yeah.
a close neighborhood, that's,
Yeah, I was wondering, do we do it based on,
you could do based upon resource protection area or zones.
or zones as a percentage of the minimum lot area? In other words, if you're making a 10% impact on your lot area, then you have to do it, or a 5%.
Right. Yeah, 5
Right, so then-
acres and,
Because doing 1,000 feet in an area that has 40,000 square foot property is a lot different than if you're doing it out in Farm and Forest, which may have absolutely no impact because it's right in the middle of your property,
sure.
right?
Except that everything does drain down.
Yeah.
Everything drains toward when the creeks fill up and the
It's all going to the ocean.
tides in, it's more water coming to, that's why we got the perfect storm.
mhm.
The tides were just right to keep all the water in, and who got the worst damage? People in the back. Marsh people.
Does it make a difference if there's a basement? How we look at, does it make a difference if there's a basement? You just mentioned a porch, right? The impact of
Yeah, how it,
if there's a basement, it would have more impact on the drainage than if it's just a porch.
yeah, if you were to, the existing structures is what they have, so if you were to add to your basement, then that would be the same impact, whether you put a slab or you were digging 4 feet. You could impact the groundwater flow, possibly. Not sure how that, you'd have to get a hydrogeologist to tell us how that potentially could impact a neighbor.
Water takes the path of least resistance,
it's
and
just-
so where's it going to go? Most likely it's to the basement.
Yeah.
Because it's not saturated with water, it's gonna just go, that's why a lot of people have French drains and sub pumps in there.
Right.
We should be really discouraging basements, especially in areas where they have, the soils are not of good quality. The Lyman Rock is one of the majority soil formations in town, and it's heavy clay, it's heavy rock, and it just retains water like a sponge, and so it's,
You bring up a good point there. I mean, one of the discouragements we would have is, okay, you're putting in a basement. If you're in an area where you know you're gonna put a basement and we're gonna need a sump pump, then you have to deal with the water,
yeah.
right? And right now, if it's a single-family dwelling, they just pump it out onto the property or
Yep,
out on the
That's what people
street,
do.
and that's what happens, right?
yep, pump it out and it's your neighbor's problem.
Somebody else, could be someone else's issue, or it could luck out and it's just all into your property and it's not a problem.
Yep.
Um,
And they can also tie in that to, because, I mean, it's water, it's not like it's polluted. They could direct it towards one of their rain gardens in their property, like that, if
Mhm.
they want to put one in.
Well, you hope it's not polluted, but
Well, it shouldn't be, yeah, it's just groundwater.
when things
right?
flood, you never know what
Yeah,
they're getting into.
But certainly the houses you see that have basements, you can tell which houses have basements, you know, in times of high water table. You can see the pumps are going all the time, and the next house has nothing
Right,
coming out, which is probably a house on a slab or on a
right.
tiny little crawl space
Yeah.
or,
and that's happening, I think, down at the beach a lot more, is people are starting to put them up on piers. They don't want to pay the insurance premiums, and then they also, once you elevate them, I mean, you can use them for kayak storage, and
Sure.
you can even park your vehicles underneath. So there's other uses to, you know,
Sure.
there's benefits to increasing the height of your structure and getting rid of the basements, but, yeah.
So when you're doing something like that, if you're putting something up on,
Piers, yeah.
is that's still considered lot coverage, even though
right,
it's
Because the
not?
structure is, yeah.
and you're still displacing, it's still you know, the surface, is the rainwater can't hit the ground. What previously hit the ground is now hitting the roof and going into the gutters and going someplace.
But it-
And
So
most people don't have it coming right back under their house.
they don't.
Right.
No, nobody wants that.
No.
Oh, that's usually like they're gonna park under there or whatever. It's
Yeah.
probably gonna be concrete, in fact.
No, but nobody, if you're elevating your house, you're gonna do everything possible to keep as much moisture out
Sure.
from underneath. You're gonna steer it away. You don't want mold and whatever else.
Yeah.
You don't want to undercut those pilings you got in place either.
Yeah,
And so. Yeah, I think there's something in there to capture folks doing, I think, significant renovations to their structures or their property, excavation of their property.
I mean,
You said we have something from an excavation standpoint, right?
An excavation standpoint as in,
Do we have, you said an ordinance on excavation?
we have a land use permit for excavation, yeah.
But does it deal at all with stormwater? No.
No, we don't have townwide stormwater
understand, yeah.
standards, which we can certainly add that, and that's in Article 6.
Yeah,
We can add those standards in there, and we can specify, you know, what
Sure.
levels, you know, people should
Yeah.
need to apply for a certain. But what it sounds like I'm hearing is single family, and then the same size for accessory structures, so 800 square feet is what we're thinking to be considered.
Or were we thinking larger than that? Was there 1,000 was thrown out?
I mean, others
No,
have
I'm
done it.
thinking
Well,
smaller.
So you're thinking smaller?
Paul's thinking smaller. I'm not sure.
thinking if you
on
build
that.
a garage,
Yeah.
you add a garage, and you have a next door neighbors, you should keep your water on your site. You shouldn't drain it right to the, plus what's our side yard? I could put a garage or an accessory building how close to my neighbor?
10 feet.
10 feet. So there go my drains.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's why I was thinking, do we do it based on the percentage of the lot
Yeah.
size, right? Because the smaller lots, 400 square feet is a lot more, could have much more of an impact than on a larger lot.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get to the point where, is it near, I mean, you could have, you know, two homes and, you know, one right next to each other on 3 acres, right? That's the mother's house, and this, well, that wouldn't matter if it was family.
Yeah.
But it may have started that way and it's not family anymore,
Mhm.
right? And you could do something that could impact your neighbor's property. So, I mean,
Yeah, we
that's
have
really
new
the
homes
key.
that-
It's just, it's impacting your neighbor's property. But I don't know how, I mean, you don't want to require it for every single thing you do out there, every time you put a shovel in the ground. All right, why don't we chew on that one and try
Yeah,
to
I
see
mean,
where
I
the.
think I can figure something out for you that's up to 800 square feet for a structure.
But I don't care whether it's 1 story or 2 stories. I
Right.
care about the footprint. So an 800 square foot,
Up to 800 square feet, there should be some sort of a standard. But it shouldn't be too onerous for them to meet it. That's what I'm understanding.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, but if someone, I mean, an accessory dwelling unit could be up to 800 square feet, you're saying, under the current,
correct,
right, can't be larger.
correct.
So I'm saying if someone puts a 50 square foot addition on in order to put a staircase up, or something de minimis, then do we really care? Should we really care? That's less than 800 square feet. So I'm looking to have some de minimis exception, so that if someone puts a shed in, a 12 by 12 or something like that, we don't care.
Right, so if you're putting in a shed, you're not gonna put in a 24 by 24 square foot shed.
Well, people do.
Because people do, yeah, I guess they got big toys they need to put in their sheds, but.
It's a big shed, isn't it?
Yeah, but you see them all over town.
Okay.
I mean, most people don't have room for it in the tight neighborhoods, obviously.
Mhm.
So, and, I wouldn't even mind the de minimis exception in the accessory dwelling, to make it consistent with this, have some, if you're building onto your existing structure beyond a certain amount, you have to have a stormwater drainage plan,
Yeah. I
in
think,
addition to the single-family home, new single-family home.
I think what we would want to, I mean, my thought on that was that, once we have one that's a townwide sort of stormwater management one, we would go back into the
Yeah,
accessory one
Yeah,
and just
and-
rip that out and say you have to.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, we would replace it with.
yeah.
So we
That's
just,
the.
Yeah, that would be much
Yeah.
better.
yeah. So we ought to think about the accessory dwelling
Yeah.
units as part of this as well.
Right,
Because right now, your requirement for accessory apartments is up to 800 square feet. They have to do low-impact design standards, whether that is, they can put a rain garden in, they can do a rain barrel. I mean, as long as it's going to retain the water on site, we were not as restrictive, trying to use, a common sense approach to allow them to figure out what they want to do on their property. And
Sure.
I believe South Portland, and they had some good handouts to help people, like, hey, here are the designs that it's basically plug and play. Here's something that you can do, and it's fairly cost effective. You don't need an engineer or anything, just go to Home
That's-
Depot, get your supplies, and
right,
That's the key, I think, for this to
Yeah.
be effective, especially.
particularly for the small ones.
For the single-family homes, the
Yeah.
folks are making renovations, that it's something that they can,
Well, but I think if you're doing, a clear cut in a single-family home,
that,
you're
different.
displacing a lot of
sure,
water, and you're going to need somebody to tell you,
right.
that this is what, you're gonna need an expert to tell you.
When do you need to have a site plan for a single family? Is there
site plan for single-family only is in shoreland currently.
only in shoreline?
Yeah, if it's new construction.
And what triggers that in shoreline? Is it just new structure, or is it, like more than 50% increase in, is there some number that triggers?
It mostly is triggered by the location, how close it is to the water resource. If it's within 75 feet of the water resource, that plays a part into it. I'm gotta remember the other sections that deal with it.
Is that that's state-driven?
That's state-driven, yeah.
Okay.
That's the 75-foot. We also require that, if it doesn't meet, if it's a non-conforming lot, and so they can't position the single-family structure on the property that's meeting all the setbacks, but it's still by right as a non-conforming lot, it has the right to build a single family.
Sure.
It's a judgment call on the planning board on the placement of said structure on the lot. So that's where that all gets,
Okay. So if I'm not in shoreland zone and I want to add, and I can because of lot coverage and all the rest, but I could add, my structure could be 60% bigger. I still don't need to do anything.
Nope.
I just get a permit from you and
Yep.
off I go.
Yep.
All right.
that's why I think your townwide standards section, that's probably a good one because it captures everything.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter what the development is. You can specify, specific triggers of, this is the level of stormwater review that you'll need to do for this level and this level and this level. You can do that. And we would want to make sure that, whatever level of review it is, especially the larger developments, it mirrors what's in your existing subdivision and site plan review process.
So interesting on the solar ones, not that I expect us, that we'll have a solar farm come in anytime soon, but is there something unique about solar farms where they're not considered a structure so that, that 4x8 panel is taking up 4x8 feet, right?
I
Is
think-
there something in the state regs or something that gives some,
It's mostly been like buffers, and
Yeah, it's more with buffers and then.
people are concerned about,
I'll say that there was concern by communities just on the large scale of these
Mhm.
developments. And then the gray area of, is a solar panel a structure or not?
right,
And so what communities have decided is, because of how many acres are disturbed, they're concerned about the runoff from each of those panels, like
Sure.
what's happening to the stormwater on that site. So that was
sure, makes sense.
I dealt with 12 solar sites in Presque Isle,
Whoa,
and we did require HydroCAD analysis, pre versus post. It required site plan review, and they made it work,
was there a certain number that went into place? Like if you're a homeowner, you're just putting a couple out in your
Oh, no,
backyard?
residents,
Didn't
usually it's
matter.
on your roof, or, it wasn't, yeah.
Yeah,
It's more like the commercial ones are
Right.
the problem.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. It's just interesting that they got picked, a couple of towns actually listed that
Yeah,
versus cell
Yeah, it's
towers
the
and
newest,
other things.
it's the newest thing,
Pickleball courts and.
Yeah,
yeah,
okay, so I'll draft something for you all on that. Was there anything else for the triggers that you wanted to, there was a certain square footage, we'll figure that out for you,
Yeah.
draft something for you. And single family is what I had. In addition, we know site plan and subdivision, that's already in our
right.
ordinance, so. Okay, nothing else
That one-
there?
Commercial triggers for site plan?
Yep.
When is that? Is it always?
Always.
Okay.
Any institution, any type of commercial activity that's taking place, we require.
Okay.
So the question would be, is since a site plan is only required for structures in shoreland zone, how do we handle new residential not in shoreland,
By having
By this.
single-family development
single-family development?
requirement, every single-family
Okay,
development.
yeah, you got it, yep.
You could do it the other way, too.
Yeah,
Is if you, are you essentially requiring a site plan if you require, for a single-family development, isolated one-off, where they just come in and pull a permit, and they're out of the shoreland zone, let's say, out of resource area?
No, so under your current site plan requirements, we exempt single-family and two-family developments and their accessory structures associated from site
Right.
plan review.
So my question is, if we required a drainage plan?
Yep.
Are we essentially requiring a site plan?
Not necessarily. So what you're requiring is if it's in the town-wide regulations, it would apply, but it would be administratively approved by the code enforcement officer.
Oh, okay.
So anything that's in the town-wide regs, that's just, it applies to the
Got it.
site plan.
That makes
and-
sense.
Yeah, but it also.
So the procedure can be simpler and less
Yeah.
expensive? and-
Yep.
okay.
No public hearings and all that
Right.
stuff. Yep.
Which is good, that keeps the cost down for the
Yeah.
folks,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Review threshold for pre versus post. This is the year threshold. And I'll pull up that section of the comp plan for you. So what you have for a strategy, and this is a medium-term strategy, reduce the threshold percentage of impervious surface area that triggers the need for stormwater management system under site plan review, and increase the design standard for stormwater infrastructure to a 100-year storm event. Do you want to do that? That's in your comp plan. So what that's saying is it's going to reduce the 10,000 square foot trigger, and then it's also going to increase now from your 25 to, where's that here?
This
Your 10
is,
to 10 to 25 year to now 100. So what that means is they're gonna have to make a bigger capacity system.
Sure.
It's gonna be more costly.
sure.
Yeah,
And this is, we're talking about subdivisions.
Actually, hold on. Make sure I had that right.
Talking about.
That was for site plan review. And increase the design standard for stormwater infrastructure to a 100-year event. So that's, I guess, more site plan review.
And what would you think about having a different standard for, increasing it for site plan and subdivisions, but not for single-family houses? Leave a lower standard on the theory that there's less impact, just,
yeah, less overall.
Yeah, that's your prerogative if you,
And the state laws don't require anything associated with that for the shoreline zone? They don't have or is 25 the requirement?
right, yeah, shoreline zone doesn't get involved in the
Doesn't it?
stormwater aspect of it. That's determined by the town.
Yeah, okay.
So right now yours is 50 years for your site plan, and it wants to go to 100. That's that next column over.
and it's 10 and 25 for subdivision.
For subdivision, it's just 1025.
And it's, oh, I see, if it's over 10,000, then it's 50.
Yeah.
So a larger,
And they made it, again, it's sounding like it's also saying, even if it's not over 10, let me see if I can stop sharing, share the other screen with you. This is the section I'm referring to. So this is my working document. I keep track of all of our strategies and things.
yep,
And so it says amend the stormwater regulations to require the stormwater to be managed on-site as opposed to allowing off-site mitigation. And then if I type in, where's find next? Where's that? There, this is the section I was looking at, right here. So it says reduce the threshold percentage for impervious surface area that triggers the need for stormwater management system under site plan review, and increase the design standard for stormwater infrastructure to a 100-year storm event.
Well, that's what we said. I would certainly see that for subdivision fitting in, right? Because it's generally a bigger area, has a potential bigger impact.
Yeah, but it's not saying subdivision.
says site
Right.
plan.
So
I'm not sure why it didn't also
Right.
include.
I think that's what we intended,
I think that was the intent.
but we didn't say that.
We didn't say it that way.
Certainly you can do it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's, I think
Yeah.
you're in
That's a
your
recommendation.
realm to review that. So let me go back to your table. Okay.
that's still a site plan, so that's only required for commercial
Yep.
and buildings and shorelands.
Yep, institutions, you know,
Right.
non-residential.
Right.
Yep.
So single-family dwelling, we can stick with what we have listed.
Yeah, right now you don't have anything.
We don't have anything,
Yeah.
so we can make it whatever we want.
Yeah, I would say we should go with this for single family and then go to 100-year for subdivision.
Yeah.
I don't see why you wouldn't be consistent for,
Yeah.
you know, a subdivision. I mean, if it's impacting the same area as a commercial building,
Right.
I don't get the logic of,
It is an expense, I will say that.
no, I understand.
It's gonna be a major expense. Going from 50 to 100, and also requiring that of subdivisions, that's just making you aware of that. So you have York that has 100, and, so York's the only one that has 100. Saco has 50, Biddeford has 50 for
I mean, all,
subdivisions.
all of these were done before we had two 500-year
Yes,
in a week.
Yep.
Because everybody thought 500 years means
Yep.
it's never going to happen in our lifetime.
Yep.
100-year, it's not going to happen in our
Is there a
lifetime.
way to kind of get the cost impact that maybe that York has seen or others? Any idea? I mean, can we just, maybe they
Yeah.
know, or maybe they've studied it or didn't study it, but,
I'm not sure. We can certainly look and see if there is a cost analysis for 50-year versus 100,
yeah.
give you an idea.
So are we looking at 50-year for single family?
No, we were thinking 10 and
10 and 25.
25 for single family, for,
But you're deciding,
non-subdivision.
thinking about the difference between 50 and 100 for
Right.
commercial or
Yeah,
subdivision?
yeah.
I mean, I assume it's very site-specific in terms of what the cost difference would be.
Yep.
But,
Yeah, I mean, if you go to some of the subdivisions that have already taken place,
yeah,
I mean, just think the double that if they had to,
yeah,
what the requirements are. I mean, that, it's a bigger BMP, bigger, you know, more area taken up for set improvements. Yeah. So we'll see if maybe there's an engineer that has a, you know,
some
But
kind
that's
of,
also taking into account a 100-year storm on the
Yeah.
existing topography,
yep,
right?
it can change.
Which could have a much bigger impact, well, will have a bigger impact than a 25-year storm.
Correct,
So you're comparing against something that's much larger as well,
yep.
right? So it's not like you have to hold all that water on your property and then let it go after the storm's over, right?
Right.
You just can't be shedding more than what it would shed today at a 100-year storm,
Correct.
that's all.
and I guess it would be interesting to know how our existing subdivisions did in these two storms. You know, were the basins big enough to hold it? Were they overflowing? Did they have an impact? I don't know if it's, I forget the amount of rain we had and how much
Yeah,
it was.
they think they were well over. I mean, they can't handle that. That was not what they were designed for.
Sure.
Right,
And that's what I tell people is, you know, we can only predict when that improvement was put in there, at that time, this was the snapshot in time of when this was the requirement of a 25-year storm. If you have a 100-year storm, 500-year storm, it's going to overwhelm the system. It's going to overwhelm everyone's property.
right.
You will have we all are going to have stormwater issues. And,
No, for sure, for sure.
yeah,
But the point would be, I mean, you know, you got the house has been there for 200 years, and then
Yep.
we build this big subdivision,
yeah,
right? And the 100-year storm comes, it just doesn't change. I mean, the last 100-year storm, that house could have been flooded, basement could have been flooded, it could have had water up to, you know, on the first floor. If the next 100-year comes in after the development and the basement flooded and you had water up to the first floor, then nothing changed.
Yeah.
Right, it's just, that's the nature of the area. So, doesn't mean that water won't get.
Right.
Water won't go where it was before.
Right.
It just won't be more than what is normal.
Right, yep. That's what we try telling people is, all we can do is match it what it was currently happening right
Yeah.
now, and,
And I would think it would be some type of range, plus or minus 20%. I mean, how can you be so exact on that kind of science,
yeah. The engineers are pretty good. They do look pre versus
Yeah.
post-development. They're pretty good at
Yeah,
calculating.
it's,
Well, maybe it would be good to have one of those guys tell us how they would do that.
Okay, so I have the threshold for that. I have the threshold for site plan. What do you want to do about the 10,000 square feet? Do we want to lower that? That was also in your comp plan. Didn't give you much of, choice on what that is. It's your prerogative, what you want to reduce that percentage to.
um,
The other thing we could think about, and maybe even with this, right, these metrics that we're putting in, you could also have a little carrot as well, right? So we used to be this, we want you to do 100. If you do 100, you get some benefit to offset that cost, right? Because it helps the town overall, because you're keeping
right,
the water on site. If you end up putting an extra house there than you could have, and you still keep the water on site, maybe that's good.
yeah,
Right, so there could be some type of carrot where there's, okay, I see the benefit of spending another
yeah, density
whatever.
bonus you're talking
I
about,
could sell another house,
yeah, to cover the cost.
right,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's worth, I would say at the end of this process,
Yeah.
it's worth having that discussion.
yeah,
Is there a way to provide carrots
right.
on any of these changes?
That gets the thing paid for,
Right,
and then it benefits the town and the way we manage our stormwater.
yeah, no, I think that's worth,
We can look at it.
And then we could do kind of the same thing with the 10,000, right? Whether it's 10,000 or it's 5, we can lower it to 5, but you gain some type of overall benefit between the two, some way, or 8 or 7 or so, whatever number we come up with, 7,500. It's. I don't know what the right number is. I really don't.
we probably don't get that many of these, I would assume. I mean, we're such a residential town versus a commercial.
Yeah, it's probably gonna apply more to the town if it does any kind of improvements. Or any institution, if there's like a school or something.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have a lot of commercial,
Yeah,
especially over 10,000 square feet, that's,
We could lower it to 9, and we said we lowered it.
uh,
But, I mean, I don't want to just do that because we had that in the plan.
right,
I think we tie that into whatever kind of carrot we come up with.
yeah, I hate to make it too complicated.
Right. Well,
The more the more we can go for some,
easy.
yeah. More complicated is the harder as people understand, the more they have to spend on a lawyer to help them understand it.
Spend it on the system to keep the water in there. Don't spend it on a lawyer.
Right,
okay.
Good.
Move to review threshold for single family. We discussed, we're gonna look into that for you. Lid standards. What are you guys thinking for lid standards? This is the low impact design.
I like the educational piece and the encouragement piece. If we want to make it a requirement, then,
maybe that's your carrot.
yeah, we should
If
have
you
some type
use-
of carrot for it.
If you use lid standards, then,
It could be. That could be part of the carrot, right?
Okay.
I would say for single-family dwellings, it would,
Most of them, it's more for single family and like
Yeah.
the smaller type projects because
Right.
that's, you're making it low impact. That's not a lot of impervious surface. You can manage it on smaller systems.
I mean, if we change the lot coverage to be consistent throughout town, that's going to have more of an impact. I mean, I've seen, it's just unbelievable. People,
Yeah.
I saw one there's one in my neighborhood, the entire front is just asphalt.
Yep.
In a brand-new, beautiful subdivision. It's,
But see, there's the benefit of using pervious concrete, pervious pavers
Right.
to keep it on site. That's
right, yeah, no, there was no,
Yeah.
I mean, it was part of a subdivision, but I wonder,
You don't have to mow it.
I know you don't have to mow it, I understand that, but
We get all that physical exercise.
it's all coming,
that-
it's all coming down the hill toward an already clogged.
That's where I do my best problem solving. I'll think about this when I'm cutting the lawn.
Yeah,
Just, I don't always write it down, so then I forget.
Yeah.
Such a manual task.
What were your thoughts on fingerprint design? You guys want to be creative or no?
Well, I like some of the ideas around a buffer for areas, but, and a 2-acre lot.
For like a single-family home, that refers to just keeping the trees.
right,
Yeah.
not allowing a clear cut, even if you're not in the
Right.
shoreland zone, keeping some trees on your property. Allow a reasonable, footprint for the house, so you don't have trees on top of the house.
But, yeah, the downside is depending on which ones you're doing, it makes it just more difficult for the contractor to build it, because of what they gotta get the materials, at least they claim, right?
Hmm.
So,
They can always
And-
replant, like
yeah.
you can always talk to them, like,
and you also don't want a nice, 50-foot tree that's, 8 feet from your house.
absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. I
Because
think
then-
that's the reasonable compromise is that, maybe the replanting is they can replant species that are
Yeah.
smaller maturity height, and that way you don't have the worry of,
Right, the
Yeah.
tree falling over.
still have the canopy benefit, but you don't have the
Yeah,
issue.
so like, we don't like trees falling on homes.
No.
There was somebody who was talking about that, wasn't it, at the last meeting, about some trees being taken down? They were fir trees, pine trees?
Yeah,
And then they had removed a few of them, but the root systems are
Right,
connected.
right.
There was-
So it impacted all,
right.
oh, right, that was a couple meetings, was it last meeting?
yeah.
That-
Which is, so I don't know enough about trees as to how you would manage that, right? So you don't want to do that either. You don't want to leave, you might be better off clear cutting it, unless, on a small area, because you're impacting the health of the trees you left behind, that then they become a danger. That's kind of what I got out of that discussion. Maybe not,
So Kennebunk
not that way.
says yes for site design layout.
Mm-hmm.
So that means I'm putting a single-family house in,
Their site plan, I believe they were similar to you, they don't require single family to go through site plan review.
oh, for site design,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Didn't we have something in the comprehensive plan in terms of
Trees.
trees along roadways and not
Yes, we did.
having, not opening up?
We did have something there.
There was a recommendation in that, I thought. So I would be in favor of retaining existing. I mean, a lot of people do that because they want the neighborhood to look the same, but other people don't understand that at all. And
Review and make where's that at? No, it's not the right. Nope. You have one that says amend land use ordinance subdivision regulations to include green infrastructure and low impact design standards, encourage complete streets and green streets. And so we are exploring that right now. That's one of the strategies. encourage developers to install street trees to ensure wildlife habitat and provide shade. Nope, nope, nope. Maintain an active shade tree program. That's all I have that's trees related. Not seeing anything for vegetation.
I think we'll have to look, I mean, we're actually coming up on our witching hour, which is the first time in a long time, coming up on 8 o'clock.
So,
Let's,
anything else you'd like to give us for impervious surface? I think we're pretty much in agreement. Consider impervious surface as part of lot coverage. We'll play with some carrots that we can give people to be flexible in their percentage calculations.
yeah,
Exemption to stormwater facilities, we don't need to change that if you don't want. And filling wetlands, are we feeling like they should get any other additional approvals, or right now it's just approval? So code enforcement officer can approve some, depending if it's under their jurisdiction, and if it goes through site plan review and subdivision review, then the planning board gets a part of it. But
is there a minimum that is excluded?
no.
So anything that's, in a wetland, you have to have, though, it has to be classified, right?
Right, there's
Yep.
different tiers for classification.
Yeah.
Some don't require state permits, other ones do.
If I build a single-family house in the woods, it's been subdivided for, you know, it was not part of a subdivision.
Yeah.
Someone sold me a lot.
Yep.
Do I have to give you a wetlands?
You have to give us that, that way we calculate the net residential area. And even if you fill those in, we still calculate them as part of your net residential area deduction.
Okay.
But the question is, you know, do we want to protect those wetlands or not to a greater extent? Because right now, it's pretty much a yes, and as long as they have their state permits that are necessary, they can,
They can do it.
Yeah.
We don't say no.
and you can think about it too. If you
Yeah,
want.
I don't think about that one.
Okay. And I think that's it for guidance. That was really outstanding.
Okay.
Aquifer protection, if you want me to look into that.
Yeah, I think we should look into that.
Okay.
And I thought there were two zones. The second zone was at the intersection of Guinea and
Yeah, I recall us having like
It's
a
where-
small,
our town nurse lives, I
Yeah.
remember specifically.
Okay.
they were relatively near each other, but one was an aquifer that was under Biddeford and us.
Right.
Across the town line.
This was the second
And there was
one.
a smaller one that was
Right.
Yep, we can look at that.
put up in the same sort of northwest quadrant, if I remember right.
And I have no idea whether people out there are on well water or
Probably,
probably.
I guess.
We have fire hydrants, but nothing else.
Well, the hydrants are probably just dry hydrants, just sucking out of a pond or a little stream or
Got it.
something nearby.
Got it.
So- I'm sorry, so so with the town water, where does it come from? It comes from these aquifers that you're saying?
No,
No.
the water we drink in this system comes from, you know, the water company, which is a Freetown water system, and they don't draw anywhere in town, in our town. They draw in Kennebunkport, Kennebunk and Wells. They buy from Biddeford, but
It's just to protect our underground aquifer system because it does feed into people's private wells if they're on private well.
which,
And it's part of what Biddeford, the aquifer's underneath Biddeford as well as Kennebunkport. And they have aquifer protection, we don't.
Oh, well, we should too.
All right, so,
For other business, I'll just give you a quick update.
yep,
So you'll have another homework assignment.
okay.
You'll see on other business, the report from staff regarding omnibus land use code changes. So we have been diligently drafting, not stormwater, but just generally, things that we've noticed that are missing. We've been getting feedback from the Climate Resiliency Committee and other residents because of all this storm damage and issues that we've been having about updating ordinances. So we are looking to update our shoreline zoning provisions, which haven't been updated well past 2015. So there's a lot of changes there. There is also an ongoing conversation right now of exempting egress stairs for structures that are elevated from lot coverage requirements, especially, you know, in these non-conforming smaller lots. We are also looking at allowing people to extend their structures to comply with FEMA or to go above the building height requirements for the town. That was a state requirement, but we're also looking at, you know, trying to be as helpful as we possibly can with people who are trying to elevate their structures for increased resiliency efforts. And so staff is drafting that right now for you, and
Okay.
it'll be for your review shortly. I think that now that we have some direction on the board, you'll have that final document for your next meeting to look over. It is intimidating, it is a large document, but I know we can get in and get at it and work through it. I have a deadline of getting this through till December to the Board of Selectmen. So that way we can get this on the ballot
Next year.
in June for the town vote. And it's important because, again, people are trying to increase their structures and we're trying to help them as much as possible, but we have a short deadline. So I just
Okay.
want to make you all aware that to get ready to sharpen your pencils and have a good
All right,
discussion.
So, yeah, so a good discussion there, so we should bring up, I'm willing to meet, 2 times next month for sure.
Sure.
Yep,
All right, so first and third Tuesdays?
Yep.
Okay.
that's all we have.
Yes, because the first Tuesday of the month is like the 7th or something?
It's the 1st of October.
1st of October?
Yep. 1st of October?
Yep.
I'll be doing that remotely, but I thought it was the 6th month.
October 1st and October 15th.
15th, yep.
Are you here?
If
Oh,
you-
yeah.
Maybe on the 29th, you can be on the 29th.
We could chat after.
Yeah.
Fine. All right,
Okay, that's it.
Thank you.
okay, take a motion to,
Oh, I'll make a motion, we adjourn at 8:05?
That motion.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks for watching.
Galen, is this a